Hi, this is Amelia Vogler, specialist in energy medicine and your host in the Energy Magazine exclusive interview series. Today, our guest is Walter Simkew. He's a medical doctor, the president of reincarnationresearch.com, and the author of Born Again: Reincarnation Cases Involving Evidence of Past Lives, The Return of the Revolutionaries, and Origin of the Soul and the Purpose of Reincarnation. His video, Evidence of Reincarnation, has over 6 million views. And Walter, thank you so much for taking some time with me today and joining me for a conversation.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, Walter, I've been facilitating past life recall and rememberings in clients for almost 10 years, and this is just going to be a thrill to talk with you. So I would just love to start with how the work of reincarnation fits into your life.
Well, the way it started was actually on a lark, actually. When I was in my medical training in Chicago, I had a friend who was into astrologers and spiritual things, and she told me that there was this trance medium working at a metaphysical bookstore, and that this person channels your spirit guides, and I really need to see this person. Well, at the time, you know, I didn't believe in psychics or mediums, but it was winter in Chicago. There was nothing else to do. And I thought, what the heck, it could be entertaining if nothing else. And so this was a trance medium, which means they go into a meditative state and let spirit beings speak through them. And there were two spirit guides who came through. The first one called himself the Universal Guardian, given to those who had come into life to make a statement. And that guide stayed for only a couple minutes. And then a different guide came in and started to give me much more detailed information. And you know, this guy told me about 2 past lifetimes. One of them was during the American Revolution. I then, you know, asked the usual things like, when am I going to find a girlfriend? and towards the end of the session, they asked, do you have any questions? So I said, well, can you tell me who I was in the American Revolution? And they said, go back to John Adams and you will see yourself in physical attributes and personality. Well, you know, I thought that was pretty ridiculous and I didn't believe it and didn't do much about it for 12 years. And well, one thing that they said that rang true is they said that they see me being a doctor in a corporate sense. And, you know, I was in my medical training, but I didn't tell them anything about myself, what kind of medicine I was studying and so forth. But as it turned out, a year later, I became a corporate medical director. So that kind of happened. 12 years went by and I became a medical director for an oil company in California, and part of my territory was Hawaii. And so I was in Hawaii for a business trip, and I was meeting with managers at the facility, and they said, well, let's go have lunch. Let's meet in the parking lot in 10 minutes. And so I was the first one there. It was midday. I was standing up, wide awake, and out of nowhere, this booming voice in my head said, study the lifetime of Adams. And I mean, it was like somebody had a megaphone in my head. and it was like, wow, what just happened, and I couldn't, and that never happened to me before. It never happened since. But it got my attention, and that night I went to the bookstore in Honolulu and started reading about Adams and the American Revolution. And my first book, Return of the Revolutionaries, is about a cohort of individuals from the American Revolution who have reincarnated in contemporary times. And those include people like Bill Clinton, Al Gore, George W. Bush, Tony Blair. They were all part of the American Revolution and incarnated in this period of time, basically to work together again. Now, my purpose really is not to promote me being John Adams, because I know that's hard to believe. But what happened in the process is I became a scholar on reincarnation research and evidence of reincarnation, and in particular the work of Ian Stevenson. And really my life purpose and the purpose of reincarnationresearch.com is really to make Ian Stevenson's work available to the average person. Stevenson was an academic psychiatrist at the University of Virginia. He was the chairman of the department, but he got an endowment from the fellow who invented the Xerox process. That fellow, Chester Carleton, gave the University of Virginia $1 million, which this was back in the 60s, it was a lot more money back then, for the express purpose that Stevenson would use that money to travel around the world studying young children who had spontaneous memories of past lives that could be objectively validated. And Stevenson did that for a period of 40 years. The typical Ian Stevenson case consists of a child who, as soon as they're able to speak, starts talking about a past lifetime. And the child tells the biologic parents enough information, like what their name was in their past lifetime, their parents' name, the town where they lived, specific details, so that the biologic parents can actually locate the past life family. The child is then reunited with the past life family and can name all these past life family members by name and relationship, know things that nobody outside the family would know. And the child has enough information that's accurate that the past life family accepts the child as the reincarnation of their deceased loved one. And Stevenson studied about 2,500 kids over this 40-year span. And in about 1,500 of the cases, the past life memories were validated. And Stevenson wrote in a very academic style because he was writing for other scientists. Mm-hmm. And because of that, his work is very difficult to read. Also because he formatted his books in a way that it was almost like a trial lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. And he would have tables where in the rows, he would have statements made by the child. And in the columns, he would have the name of each witness in the case and which witness corroborated which statement. So, in terms of evidence, it's laid out beautifully, but it's kind of hard to piece together the story in that way. So what I've done is I've rewritten Ian Stevenson cases in easy to read story form. I put in all the important details and facts but I make it readable. And really that's what the purpose of the website is. Rather than having to go through Stevenson's work, and he has one book that's 2 volumes and 2,000 pages long, and not many people are going to read that. So what I've done is taken his cases and made them accessible to people. And the interesting thing is that from these cases, we can actually derive what I call principles of reincarnation. We can understand how reincarnation works based on these studies. And these include that people can look exactly the same from one lifetime to another. And how do we know that? Well, you take a Stevenson case where the child has validated memories, and then you follow that child for 20 years until they become an adult. And what Stevenson realized that as an adult, this person resembled exactly who they were in a past lifetime. And Stevenson has several of these cases, but there are also other independently researched cases that show the same thing. For instance, the most important American case involves James Leininger, who as a young boy had terrible nightmares. And he would yell out in the night, plane on fire, little man can't get out. And his parents would run into his room trying to see what's going on and to comfort him. And he would give all sorts of details about World War II aircraft, what Japanese planes were called, like Zeeks and Bettys by the Americans. He knew all about American World War II aircraft. And this is a little child who doesn't know how to read yet. And his parents knew that he was not learning this from watching Sesame Street. And his father was actually an evangelical Christian who was totally hostile to the idea of reincarnation. But his son gave him enough details that the father was actually able to locate who this child was as a World War II fighter pilot who died in the Battle of Iwo Jima. They were actually able to find the surviving sister of this pilot. So James Leininger's past life persona was James Houston. They were able to find James Houston's surviving sister, who is now like 70 or 80 years of age, and they connected little James with their surviving sister over the phone. And little James gave so much specific information about their family life, such as they had a sister named Ruth, that their father was alcoholic and had to go to rehab, that their sister wrote for a society column and was horrified when their mother actually worked as a maid for one of the socialites that the sister was writing about. I mean, all this very detailed personal information that is not accessible in any history book. You know, the Houston family was nobody famous, you know, there's no books about them. So the child spontaneously knew so much information that the sister sent all the surviving artifacts of her brother to little James Leininger. And who happened to be interviewing the Leiningers when this package came? But the journalist, Cuomo, you know, the brother of the governor. And so this case has actually gotten a lot of publicity. It was on ABC primetime back in 2005 and so forth. Well, you know, when I first saw the case on TV in 2005, because I had been working on the facial feature resemblance since 1995. And I predicted in 2005 that when little James grows up, he's going to look just like James Houston, because there are surviving photographs of James Houston. And sure enough, I became friends with the father, who would send me pictures of James as he was growing up. And now, as a full grown adult, James looks exactly like James Houston, his own past life personality. Another case that I'd like to mention involves the reincarnation of Anne Frank, which is probably the most important reincarnation case in the world. And most people know that Anne Frank was persecuted and died in a concentration camp because she was born Jewish in Germany. And the family fled to Amsterdam to try to escape the Nazis, and hid in an attic for 2 years, where they survived on beans, cans of beans. And then, later on, they were captured and died in a concentration camp. Well, she reincarnated as a woman named Barbara Carlin. Barbara Carlin was born 9 years after Anne Frank died. Anne Frank died in 1945. Barbara was born in 1954 in Sweden to a Christian family. She had spontaneous memories. She was a classic Ian Stevenson case, though there was no Ian Stevenson to study her. Her parents were Christian. So when she started to talk about this past life, and in fact, one of the first things she said is, "My name's not Barbara, it's Anna Frank." And her parents had no idea who Anne Frank was, because the diary of Anne Frank had not yet been translated or published in Sweden. So they had no knowledge of who the historic Anne Frank was. And they thought that Barbara was making all this up. Things changed when Barbara was 10 years old, and the family went on a vacation touring the major cities of Europe. And one of the places they went to was Amsterdam, where the Frank family had hid. By this time, the diary of Anne Frank had been published in Swedish, and the parents knew who Anne Frank was. So the father at the hotel, he decides he wants to see the Anne Frank House and Museum. So he takes a phone off the hook to call a cab to take him there. And Barbara, who's 10 years old, says, "We don't need a cab, it's right near here." And the father said, "Well, how can you know? You've never been here." And she says, "I'll show you." And she takes her parents by the hand and leads them on a 10-minute walk through the winding streets of Amsterdam straight to the Anne Frank house, which is quite a feat. I mean, I've been in Amsterdam. I went jogging and I could not find my way back to my hotel because there's canals, the road curved, the buildings tend to look all the same. And for her to be able to go straight to the Anne Frank house is pretty amazing. Then inside the Anne Frank house, they walked into the room where Anne Frank had slept, and Barbara looked at a wall and said, "Look, Mommy, the pictures of the movie stars are still on the wall." Well, the mother looked at the wall and said, "Barbara, there's nothing there." And Barbara looked again and realized that was true. The wall was blank. She got confused, started to cry, and the mother said, "Well, wait, let's ask the tour guide." And the tour guide said, "Well, yes, normally the pictures that Anne Frank had clipped from magazines of movie stars and celebrities were on that wall, but people were touching them, taking them, damaging them. So we took them down. We're going to put them under glass and then put them back up on the wall. Well, that's when her parents finally realized that all her past life memories were not fantasies, but real.
That's extraordinary.
It is. And not in addition, Barbro replicated the talent of Anne Frank. I make the point that Anne Frank is not the most famous victim of the Holocaust because she had the worst death. It's because she was a gifted child writer who, in her diary, wrote about mature themes like the nature of man, good and evil, that sort of thing. And scholars have always been amazed that a child could write about such mature topics as an adolescent. And that's why her diary got published and is translated, so it's read by every child all over the world, to teach about prejudice. And Barbro did the same thing. She started to write for herself, and at the age of 12, a friend read some of her writings and said, wow, this is really good, it should be published. And Barbro had her first book of prose published at the age of 12. It became the best-selling prose book in Swedish history. She wrote another 9 books in her teenage years and became a child celebrity. Well, Barbara also had phobias related to the Anne Frank life. For instance, she was terrified of men in uniform. She also had a repulsion to eating beans, which the Frank family lived on for 10 years. And Barbara, as an adult, looks exactly like Anne Frank did. So here's another case where we followed somebody from childhood to adulthood, and we again see that the facial features are the same across 2 incarnations. So it's through this database of cases that we've been able to understand how reincarnation works. And in my opinion, the way this happens is that the soul projects an energy field into the developing fetus. And the fetus shapes around this energy field. And in orthopedic surgery, they do use, in very bad fractures, they use electric current to shape the bone so it grows in a straight line. I believe the same phenomenon happens with the bones, particularly of the face, that shapes around this energy template so that we appear the same from one lifetime to another. This energy connection also downloads information which explains child prodigies. And that's how Barbara Carlin was able to become a childhood writing prodigy, just like Anne Frank, because the experience of the soul gets transmitted into the body and the developing child. So reincarnation research explains child prodigies.
Wow. You gave me a lot to respond to there.
I'm not done yet. let me make one more point, which I think is very important, is that the evidence shows that we plan our lifetimes. And there are many, many Ian Stevenson cases that demonstrate this. One of the most powerful studies is his twin study. And remember, out of these 1,500 validated childhood memory cases, he actually had 31 sets of twins where the twins, both twins, remember their past lives.
Oh, wow.
So we're talking about 31 sets of twins, 62 people in all. And Stevenson found that in 100% of these cases, the twins had very significant past life relationships. The most common was the twins were siblings before. And there's even one case where twins in the past lifetime reincarnated as twins again. Then people who also were best friends could be twins in the next lifetime, and even spouses could be twins in the next lifetime. So this study shows that not only do we plan lifetimes, but that the soul is able to actually influence the process of conception so that a soul can determine exactly where it's going to be born. So it really sheds great light on the whole process of life. And one of the most important things, and the reason I created the Reincarnation Research.com website, and by the way, reincarnation research is one word, is for this information to be available to people. Because if you reflect on the Anne Frank case, Anne Frank was killed because she was Jewish, but she reincarnated into a Christian family. If the Nazis knew you could be born Jewish in one lifetime and Christian in another, the Holocaust could never have happened. Right. These days, you know, most wars are based on differences in religion, nationality, ethnic affiliation. Even in the Muslim faith, you know, you have factions like the Sunnis and Shiites, and they have wars against each other and blow up each other's mosques. Well, if the Sunnis knew they could reincarnate as Shiites and vice versa, if Muslims knew they could reincarnate as Jewish people and vice versa, and Stevenson cases show this. I mean, Stevenson has cases in which Muslims reincarnated into different religions, such as Christian or Hindu. When people realize that these are temporary cultural markers of identity, they'll stop fighting about it. And this is really my motivation for doing this work, for creating and building the Reincarnation Research website so people can read these cases for themselves. And I would just like to mention that on the left-hand side of the homepage of our website, there's a list of tabs such as physical resemblances, planning lifetimes, birthmarks related to past lives. What Stevenson found was that if somebody had a traumatic wound in a past lifetime, such as a bullet wound or a stab wound, in the next lifetime, there would be a birthmark there. And Stevenson wrote a 2,000-page book about these cases. The planning of lifetimes I mentioned, there are about 10 principles of reincarnation that I list. And you can just click on that tab and you will see all the Stevenson cases and other independent research cases that demonstrate that phenomenon. So if you press on physical resemblances, you'll see all the Stevenson cases where physical resemblance is either shown or noted.
It is quite an extraordinary website for those of you who haven't visited yet. I was so struck. You actually show the pictures of the individuals on the page, and so it's easy to navigate. It's a fascinating website. You've just done an extraordinary job. cataloging all these stories.
It took a lot of work.
It's extraordinary.
And I did it all myself.
Walter, tell us a little bit about what your definition of reincarnation is, or maybe share in like how do you think this all works?
Okay, well, I should mention that the most important work is the work of Ian Stevenson and cases like that, where reincarnation can be objectively documented. For certain questions, that research cannot give answers. For instance, how many times does a person have to reincarnate before they stop reincarnating? Because of that, 20 years ago, I sort of interviewed a dozen psychics to see if they could help me sort out reincarnation cases. Because people then would come to me and say, I think I was this person and that person. And, some cases, like the Stevenson cases, rest on their own merit. But other cases, you're not sure if this is true or not. So I was looking for a psychic who could help me sort these cases out. And none of them could until I met Kevin Ryerson. And Kevin Ryerson is a trance medium. He's been made famous because he worked with Shirley, and he still works with Shirley MacLaine, the actress and author. And in fact, Kevin is featured in 4 of Shirley's books. Well, when I started to work with Kevin, I found that he channels a spirit being whose name is Atun Ray. Atun Ray says that he last was incarnate on Earth about 3,500 years ago in Egypt. And I found through experience that Atun Ray can make accurate past life matches, at least with a high degree of accuracy. And once I realized that Atun Ray had this ability, then I started to ask him the bigger picture questions, about what's reincarnation about, why do we do it, when does it end, and so forth. And my book, Origin of the Soul and Purpose of Reincarnation, is basically my dialogues with Atun Ray about these topics. The simple analogy is that, each of us is a little piece of God. We're like little buds of God. But when we're created as a soul, we have no experience. And I kind of use the analogy, what if you had no memories at all? Who would you be? You wouldn't know who you are because your identity is based on your memories and your life experiences. Well, the same thing happens with the soul. It's kind of a blank slate. And so the soul has to go through a series of incarnations to develop memories, to have experiences, and to establish an identity based on those experiences. So we can think of the soul actually as like an energy memory device that contains our past lives and which can impart knowledge in future incarnations. Was there, I think we had a different question.
And that was kind of interesting. Well, that was all very interesting. But you were talking about, how do we know when our incarnation is going to come to, like our reincarnation cycles, when do they come to an end? Like what?
So that's another piece of this puzzle is that when we are created as souls by God, we are imbued with a certain spectrum of energies. And just like there's a spectrum of light, each of us is created with a spectrum of certain energies. If you say the color red is aggression, some people are imbued with more red light or more of an aggressive nature.
Mm-hmm.
People are going to pursue careers in the military, maybe as police, things like that. Other souls are imbued with artistic abilities. So from one lifetime to another, that soul will just naturally gravitate to artistic fields because that's what they're naturally good at. You could think of the whole process of incarnation as parallel to a child going through school to get to adulthood to become a self-sufficient human being.
Mm-hmm.
A child can't really take care of themselves. They don't know much, but after 20 years of education, they become self-sufficient. It's the same process in becoming a mature soul. To become a mature soul where we don't have to incarnate anymore, first of all, we have to develop our God-given talents to a sufficient degree. We have to neutralize karma that we have incurred. If you hurt people in one lifetime, in the next lifetime, you are going to have to experience that hurt. So you learn not to do that again. And in the process, what you do is you end up developing compassion and tolerance. And Atun Ray says basically we stop incarnating when we've developed our talents to a sufficient degree. We've neutralized the karma that we've incurred on Earth. We develop a all-encompassing love of humanity or compassion for humanity. And then also live life with joy. And once you do that, you don't have to incarnate anymore. Then you can continue to advance in the spiritual planes, which are very nice. I've asked, Atun Ray, why haven't you incarnated at 3,500 years? And he likes it up there. And there's an infinitely more experiences that you can have in the spirit world than you can on Earth. So you have the choice to incarnate again to help humanity along, but it's not mandatory.
Well, one of the things that you were speaking to also is this sense of time, kind of coming back and coming back. So what do you think the concept of time, that progression, like what do you think the relationship between time and the process of reincarnation is?
Well, time is a feature of our three-dimensional world.
Mm-hmm.
In the spirit world, time doesn't exist. It's just kind of an eternal now. But on Earth, there is linear time. And I know that, there are some pundits who like to say that everything's happening at once, that the past and the future are all happening at the same time, which is simply, a New Age fallacy. That's not true. Time is linear. We experience linear time while we're in the three-dimensional world. It's reincarnation happens over time, and it's pretty straightforward. The only difference is in the spirit world, you don't have time.
What about, let's see, people who might say, no, I don't believe in reincarnation, or your work is just bogus. How do you approach folks that sort of don't have this idea?
Well, they're simply closed-minded. And really, that's why I built the website. I'm not coming off as a prophet saying, I myself know everything and reincarnation exists. I built the website so these skeptics can read the cases themselves. And if you go through the website, read all the cases, and come to the conclusion that reincarnation doesn't exist, you are simply closed-minded, period. And one thing that happens is that I was talking to a psychologist once, and he pointed out that most people settle on a belief system as early adults. And once you settle on that belief system, you don't want to change from it.
Well, Walter, your research is so vast and it's so interesting, and I'm so curious, how has this work changed you in your life?
Well, I just 100% see myself as a spirit being and in a body. And I think the biggest effect is what I spoke about before, is the potential that I see that reincarnation research can help make the world a more peaceful place without war, because war is really totally irrational. And all we do is we hurt ourselves. Consider if we took all the money that is spent by all the nations on defense and machines of war, what if we put all that into productive causes like, non-polluting energy, into medical research, into agricultural research? If we put that money into making our planet a better place, it's a much better use of the investment. And in fact, when you realize you're going to keep coming back to this planet, then all of a sudden the environment is a much higher priority. You don't want to come back to a planet that's barren, that doesn't, have any breathable air. You don't want to come back to a planet that looks like Syria now, that's all bombed out. You want to come back to a planet that you want to come back to. And I think that really is going to be the greatest legacy of reincarnation research. It's going to take humanity really from the dark ages of spirituality represented by the old religions, and it's going to replace it with more of a secular understanding of spirituality.
Walter, I can't help but agree with you. And I think also the idea of coming back, I think, calls us to a responsibility. So many different types of responsibilities that we have to ourselves and others.
And one kind of thing I'd like to point out, I started the interview by telling you the hypothesis that I'm the reincarnation of John Adams, which I understand is very hard to believe. But there is actually a very clear pattern of similarity. John Adams dedicated his life to help create a democracy in a time where monarchs ruled. There were kings, queens, royal families that had all the power, and the average person had no power. And democracy shifted power from the old monarchies to the individual, to democracy. The same thing now is happening with evidence of reincarnation, where the old religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, they're the spiritual monarchies of old. They hold the rules, they hold the power. But evidence of reincarnation is going to shift that back to the individual.
Yeah.
And the individual is going to realize, I am responsible for my own actions, my own spiritual growth. I'm going to have to face the consequences of bad things that I do in a future life. And that is going to suck the power out of the old religions. And I mean, we see it today more and more. Fewer young people go to churches and synagogues and all that because it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And that trend through evidence of reincarnation is going to continue. I mean, they're still going to be around because we need places to have weddings and funerals and all that. But in the future, people will live with the realization that we reincarnate, and we can reincarnate into a different religion, ethnicity, nationality. So let's stop fighting about this.
Yes. Yes. Amen.
And I rest my case.
Walter, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and sharing your incredibly interesting work and perspective. I hardly know now if I shouldn't just say, all right, John, see you next time, you know. But Walter, it was fantastic to talk with you today.
And I also applaud you for the work that you're doing to get this information out.
It's our pleasure. Thank you.